Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're answering a question, okay, so I have internalized homophobia. What do I do about it? I get this question a lot in different forms, and it's a hard one to give a blanket answer to. Let's review real quick what internalized homophobia actually is. Internalized homophobia is the set of negative feelings or beliefs about yourself that comes from society's beliefs about those in the LGBTQIA plus community. So essentially, what society has said or does say about however you identify, you have internalized those messages and assume that about yourself. A couple of things to be aware of when it comes to internalized homophobia. For a lot of people experiencing homophobia internally, they do not apply that to people outside of them. So a lot of people will have no problem with anything anyone in the queer community is doing outside of them. But when it comes to things that they're doing, they have a hard time with it, with reconciling it, with being okay with themselves, with giving themselves space to figure out who they are, because the problem is them, not anyone else. Understanding where it comes from, also important. Many societies in our world today have some sort of negative connotation or assumption about those in the queer community. Whatever that is, it's different depending on what country you're living in, and the degree of it is different depending on what country you're living in. And for some people, it's changing every day. But whether or not you're listening to the news and whether or not you're actively consuming things that say directly negative things about who you are or who members of your community are, that doesn't mean you're not experiencing the overt homophobia, transphobia, biphobia that is existing around you, because it exists in so many things all of the time. It exists in the way that we talk to each other. It exists in the way that kids are split up in school into teams for PE. It exists in the way that we split kids up when we teach them about their bodies in elementary school, or when children come home from school and we ask them if they're interested in anyone in their class, right? Do you have a boyfriend to the girls? Do you have a girlfriend to the boys? Like the inherent implicit assumptions in society that heteronormativity is baked in. When heteronormativity is baked into a society, the assumption is anything outside of heteronormativity is wrong. And because you're assuming that anything that is not heteronormative and cisgender is wrong, that becomes homophobic and cisphobic, anything outside of that. Following me? So when you start to feel like, oh, this might not be me, I might not fit into these parameters, like I might, as a girl, not like guys, I might like girls, or I might like both guys and girls, or I've always been told I'm a girl and I'm not so sure that that's actually true. Those thoughts are already assumed from the get-go that they should be silenced, that they should be hidden, that they're probably not going to be accepted, because all along you've been told that there's one way to be, period. So you grow up, you figure out who you are, maybe you even start to self-actualize and figure out who you are, and then you deal with all of the negative thoughts that you have inside of you because of the way that society as a whole, maybe your families, maybe your religious organizations, maybe your friends, have given those messages to you overtly or implied about the unacceptability of who you are and the negative impacts of that on your life and society's life. Internalized homophobia can play out in people's lives in lots of different ways. High-risk behaviors, shame in your identity, shame in things that make you happy, low self-worth, eating disorders or disordered eating, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, relationship problems, feelings of inadequacy, depression, anxiety, other mental health issues, lack of ability to connect to other people. There are lots of different ways this plays out in people's lives. Is that to say that everybody within the LGBTQIA plus community that experiences depression is because of internalized homophobia? No, absolutely not. But lots of people within the LGBTQI plus community have depression and anxiety, and lots of them have internalized homophobia. That's all I'm saying. For lots of people with internalized homophobia, they experience like the perception of rejection when it might not even actually be there, because they're internally rejecting themselves on the regular. So they assume who's going to actually like me when they get to know me. Like they're going into a lot of interactions with an assumption of rejection at some point. Like people only get to know them until a certain time. Even if they go into the interaction knowing that they are part of the community, if they go into the interaction dating as an out person, they're going to carry with them that assumption that people are not to be trusted because people who have loved them in their past have loved them up until they found out the truth about them and then they left. See last week's video. Oftentimes people with internalized homophobia seek recognition and affirmation from other people over and above and beyond what typically as humans we are craving as far as affirmation and recognition and connection to other people. Because you aren't getting that affirmation and connection to yourself internally, so you're looking for it externally. So what do we do about it? It all depends on where it's showing up for you. Is it showing up in your first attempt to reconcile who you know yourself to be with who society has told you are? That's going to be a different answer than the second time it tends to come out, which is after you've done your coming out and you've sort of settled in. A lot of times, another of internalized homophobia can crop up because like that deep-seated, deeper buried assumptions about yourself that you didn't have a chance to explore until you were in that like safer, more mature, more stable relationship. Then your psyche sort of brings that stuff up so you can deal with it then. So if we're dealing with the first one, there's a couple different things you can do. Small caveat. Those of you who know me know my utter disdain for CBT, right? CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is a form of therapy that I do not practice until I do. Essentially, at its core, it's a type of therapy where negative thought patterns about the world are challenged in order to alter unwanted like behavioral patterns and treat mood disorders like depression. I am not someone who defaults to this type of therapy. I do think there are some instances in which challenging our thought patterns are appropriate. And we are going to talk about challenging some thought patterns in this arena. I don't think you can CBT your way out of depression. What to do? First things first, you need to acknowledge it. And I know that sounds so simple, but so many people are rushing through to fixing it that you're not taking the time to acknowledging what's happening for you. So when you are feeling some type of way about your identity as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, when you're feeling negatively about yourself, when you're assuming somebody's not going to like you because of your identity, when you are wondering if you're worthy of love because you don't fit into who you were supposed to be your whole life, you need to acknowledge that you are dealing with something that is internalized and deep and challenging. And name it. Like you need to say out loud if you need to. Like I'm dealing with internalized homophobia. I'm dealing with internalized transphobia. I'm dealing with internalized biphobia. You need to name it. You need to acknowledge it for yourself. Because if you don't and you just try to fix it, first of all, people aren't broken. They're not to be fixed. But if you just move forward and try to fix it, you're skipping that kindness to yourself. And by skipping the kindness to yourself, you're just trying to fix yourself like everybody outside of you is trying to fix you also. That's all you're doing, which means it's not going to change and it's not going to stick and you're not doing anything different than was already done to you. Like nothing changes. Okay, step 2, I want you to start releasing your heteronormative assumptions. And a lot of people... A lot of you are going to say, well, I've already done that. Have you though? Like, have you? Here's a question. If you are somebody who experiences attraction, why are you attracted to the people you're attracted to? Like, why? Are you attracted to them because you are attracted to them? Are you attracted to them because they have aspects that other people find attractive and so you should find them attractive? Do you question your identity or the label that you have accepted or toying with within the queer community? And if you are questioning it, why are you questioning it? Is it because you don't have any experience in that area? Is it because you don't want to be stuck with a label? What's going on there? You need answers. And what your answer is going to determine where you go. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure kind of video. And I can't take every one of those threads for you. So I'm just going to like give you some of the broadband like answers that I tend to get. And for a lot of people who are questioning their identity within the community, they're like, well, what if I'm not, right? Like, how do I know? And usually that comes back to internalized homophobia. And my response is, do you ever ask a girl who has a boyfriend, well, how do you know you're going to like boys for the rest of your life? Like, if you get married, are you sure you're going to be married to a man for the rest of your life? Like, society as a whole doesn't ask her that, right? We don't do that. We don't look at a guy who likes a girl and say, well, are you sure you like girls? Have you kissed her yet? Because how do you know you're going to like kissing girls? We don't ask that question because we assume that everyone is straight. If you're basing your question that you have about who you are, if you're basing your dislike about this possibility or your fear about this possibility on whether or not it's real, that is based in some kind of internalized phobia because your assumption is being that thing is probably a negative. One of the things that people say a lot is like, I don't want my life to be harder. Or if a parent has a child come out to them, they're like, well, your life is going to be harder this way. That is a hard thing for people to stop doing, but they need to stop doing that because the assumption that someone's life is going to be harder if they are not part of the cis-het narrative is, okay, it's hard in 2025 to say it's not true, but it removes the actual positives of like self-actualization and the positives of living into who you are and being able to truly be you. It removes all of that and just focuses on the fact that there are things out there that are not constructed for people in our community. And that shouldn't be the focus. There's time to focus on that later. So again, these questions, like, what are the concerns that you have in your head when you think about your identity, when you think about your attraction, when you think about your label? What are the thoughts that you have in your head that are negative? And whose words are they? Whose voice are they? Are they a parent? Are they a friend? Are they a newscaster? Are they, like whose are they? Who's giving you these thoughts? Are they yours? That's okay if they are, but I'm just saying, like, if they're coming from somewhere external from you, you don't need to be entertaining them, most likely. And if they're coming from you, why do you think them? Like, am I sure? Like, why are you asking yourself if you're sure? Right? You need to, like, this is journal work, like a lot of this. Write down the question and then write down your thoughts about it. Why are you asking the question? Where does the fear come from? What's the assumption you have about your answer? Like, just working through that, okay? Noticing the questions that come up, noticing the negative thoughts, how often do you have them, and working through them as they come up. I would also encourage people to consume queer media. Now, this is something that needs to be done at your own pace and in your own way. I do have one video where I ask people to sort of like share the queer media that they're enjoying, but it's a little bit old of a video. So I'm going to link it up here. I don't know which side it's on, so I'm just going to point. It's in one of these. I'm going to link it. And then also at this point, anybody who has queer media that you enjoy, please drop it in the comments because we need to help people out. When you consume this queer media, I want you to notice what comes up for you. Do you feel grossed out by any of it? Do you feel like weirded out? Do you have any other feelings? Like, consume queer media, number one, to normalize LGBTQIA plus relationships and identities. And number two, to see where those thoughts are stuck for you. Like, what is going on for you and what are the assumptions you have? What are the fears you have? Like, those are going to come up when you're observing people living out their lives. There are some people who will encourage you to go on dates. You don't have to go on dates in order to affirm your identity, though. So, like, if you want to date, sure, that's cool. This is not required in any way. Like, it's just not. If your internalized homophobia is keeping you from dating and you want to date, essentially, just go on the date. Like, it's just one date. You know what I mean? Like, just go on a date if that's the only thing keeping you back. Because knowing you have the fear and doing the scary thing with the fear, like, that's okay. But if you don't want to date, you also don't have to, because that has no bearing on the validity of your identity at all. Okay, within all this, while you're journaling, while you're consuming queer media, while you're, I don't know, maybe on a dating app or whatever, like thinking about the things that come up for you one by one and where does it come from? What are your icks? What are your questions? What are your thoughts? Like you need to be identifying each of them for yourself, figure out where they're coming from, figure out like kind of like what's the root of it. And in reality, if the root of it is something external to you, an assumption you were taught, something that somebody said to you once, something you read in a newspaper, I don't know, like if it's something external to you and your authentic experience of who you are, you don't need to spend time on it. So when that thought comes up again, reminding yourself, this is not mine. Like it's not mine. It just takes practice to do that. And eventually, that part becomes easier. The more time that you can spend immersed in things that are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, the less internalized homophobia becomes a problem. And that is because the normalization of things that are actually very normal, aka being part of our community, that normalization makes those internal voices quiet down. So whether that's finding community in your like physical area, finding groups to be with, finding people online, finding community here on this channel, which a lot of people have done. Like I said, consuming media, listening to artists, finding Facebook groups, Discord servers, playing video games with queer characters, like getting into the community and having that exposure is also going to be another step to that normalization piece for you. Following creators on Instagram and on YouTube and on TikTok that are somewhere on their self-actualization journey. All of these things are going to help you to feel less isolated and help to normalize all of these things for you, because that's really what it is. Internalized homophobia is isolation too. Like it makes you feel alone, it makes you feel wrong, and it makes you feel like you have to hide yourself. And you don't. Because there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with being part of the LGBTQIA plus community. There just isn't. And I know that's not necessarily the message that a lot of you have gotten. That's not the message that I got. That's not the message that many people get. But that doesn't mean that message of unacceptability was correct. Okay, I know that was very broad because this is a difficult question to answer specifically because there's so many different aspects to this. So if you have more specific questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I can't give personalized therapy advice, obviously, on this channel, but if there are questions that all kind of cover the same theme, I can make videos out of them like I did for this one. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next time. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.